Unfortunately, Elvis did not have, he had full control of what he was able to listen to choose. But there was a whole behind the scenes business thing going on.
For over 40 years, he kept a promise to his dying friend. Now, at 81, Elvis Presley's close friend disclosed what he confessed to him during those final terrifying months. What did the king quietly confess when no one else was listening? What secret was so dangerous it might have cost the king his life? Stay tuned, because this would change all you knew about the king of rock and roll, the phone call and the White House secret. Jerry Schilling sat in his Los Angeles living room on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. At 81 years old, he had grown accustomed to the peace of retirement. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was a journalist from a major newspaper asking about recently declassified FBI documents, documents that mentioned Elvis Presley by name, documents that suggested the king of rock and roll had been more than just an entertainer. Jerry felt his heart race. For decades, he had kept a promise made to his best friend on a late night at Graceland, when Elvis had looked him in the eyes and asked him to keep a secret. A real secret. The kind that could get people unalived. But now, with these documents becoming public, Jerry realized the time had finally come. The truth needed to be told, and he was one of the last people alive who knew what really happened. The journalist asked specific questions about Elvis's relationship with federal agents, about secret meetings, about assignments that went far beyond what any celebrity should have been involved in. Jerry politely ended the call, but his mind was racing. He walked to his study and pulled out an old box from the back of his closet. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents he had kept hidden for over 40 years. Evidence of a double life that the world never knew about. Jerry and Elvis had met back in 1964. Jerry was just a kid, and Elvis was already the biggest star in the world. But they connected in a way that went beyond fame and money. Elvis saw in Jerry someone who wanted nothing from him except friendship. Over the years, that friendship deepened. Jerry became part of Elvis's inner circle, traveling with him, working for him, and most importantly, being someone Elvis could trust completely. That trust would lead to conversations that Jerry never imagined having. Conversations about government work, about danger, about secrets that weighed on Elvis like stones in his pockets. But the story really began on a cold December day in 1970. Everyone remembers the famous photograph of Elvis meeting President Richard Nixon at the White House. Elvis showed up unannounced, wearing a purple velvet suit and cape, carrying a gift for the president. The whole thing looked like an eccentric celebrity stunt. The media laughed about it. People made jokes about Elvis and his obsession with collecting law enforcement badges. But Jerry knew the truth. That meeting was not a joke. It was not a whim. Elvis had requested that meeting with a specific purpose in mind. He wanted to offer his services to the government. He wanted to help fight the narcotic culture that was destroying young people across America. He wanted to use his fame and access to infiltrate groups that the FBI could never reach on their own. And President Nixon, after initial skepticism, had agreed. The badge Elvis received that day was not just ceremonial. It was real. It came with real responsibilities and real dangers. That meeting launched a secret operation that would consume the rest of Elvis's life and ultimately destroy him. The first assignments in Vegas operations. The night Elvis first told Jerry about his work with federal agents was one Jerry would never forget. They were alone at Graceland, sitting in Elvis's private den long after everyone else had gone to bed. Elvis seemed different that night, nervous and excited. Like a kid with a secret he was bursting to share. He made Jerry promise not to tell anyone what he was about to hear. Elvis had just completed his first real assignment for the FBI. During his recent concert tour, Elvis had been gathering intelligence. He was watching people in the crowds, listening to conversations backstage, paying attention to who was selling what and to whom. His handlers had given him specific names to look out for: counterculture figures, narcotic dealers, people connected to radical political groups. Elvis had access that no law enforcement officer could ever have. People trusted him. They wanted to be near him. They talked freely around him, never suspecting that the king of rock and roll was taking mental notes and reporting back to federal agents. The FBI had given Elvis a code name. They had set up secure ways for him to communicate information without anyone knowing. Dead drops, coded phone calls, secret meetings disguised as regular celebrity activities. Elvis loved it at first. He felt like he was finally doing something meaningful with his fame, something that mattered beyond entertaining people. But what Elvis did not realize at the beginning was how his entire operation depended on the people around him. The Memphis Mafia, as everyone called his entourage, became the perfect cover for his double life. Elvis traveled everywhere with a group of 15 to 20 men, friends, bodyguards, assistants, cousins. To the outside world, it just looked like typical celebrity excess. But the truth was more calculated. FBI handlers could blend right in with the regular crew. Nobody questioned new faces when Elvis always had new people around. Secret meetings could happen right under everyone's noses, disguised as just another Memphis Mafia hangout. Jerry was one of only 2 or 3 people in the inner circle who knew the full truth. The others had no idea. Red West thought he was just protecting Elvis from crazy fans. Sonny West thought he was just helping his cousin live the celebrity lifestyle. Joe Esposito thought he was just managing logistics. None of them knew that some of the security guys were actually federal agents. None of them knew that certain meetings were actually intelligence briefings. Elvis felt terrible about keeping secrets from his closest friends, but he had no choice. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was. Then came Las Vegas. When Elvis signed his residency deal at the International Hotel in 1969, the FBI saw an incredible opportunity. Vegas was mob territory. Casino owners, narcotic dealers, and organized crime figures all operated openly in the desert. And Elvis was about to become the biggest draw on the Strip. He would have access to everyone. The powerful casino bosses trusted him. The dealers and fixers wanted to be near him. The criminals saw him as just an entertainer, never suspecting he was watching and listening to everything. Communist networks and narcotic ring investigations. Elvis's Vegas shows became more than just entertainment. They became intelligence-gathering operations. Between 1969 and 1977, Elvis performed over 600 shows in Las Vegas. Every single one gave him opportunities to observe and report. The showrooms were filled with exactly the kind of people the FBI wanted to monitor. High rollers with suspicious connections, businessmen who laundered money through the casinos, women who worked as couriers for narcotic operations. Elvis saw it all from the stage and heard even more backstage. But Vegas was just part of his assignment. The FBI had bigger concerns in the early 1970s. The counterculture movement was growing. Anti-war protests were spreading across college campuses. Groups with communist sympathies were organizing young people. The government wanted to know who was leading these movements and what they were planning. Elvis's concerts attracted exactly these kinds of crowds: young radicals, activists, people the FBI considered dangerous to American security. Elvis felt conflicted about this part of his work. He understood fighting narcotic dealers and mobsters. Those were clearly bad people doing bad things. But surveilling Americans who were just protesting the war or questioning the government felt different. These were kids, students, people exercising their constitutional rights. Elvis had his own doubts about Vietnam. He had served in the army. He knew what war meant. But his handlers insisted that some of these groups were planning violence. They told him about bombings being planned, about weapons being stockpiled, about foreign agents trying to recruit American youth. So Elvis watched and reported. He used his backstage access to identify leaders of radical groups who came to his shows. He noted who was distributing what literature. He listened to conversations about planned protests and underground networks. The counterculture saw Elvis as safe. He was one of them in a way. A rebel who had challenged the establishment with his music and his style. They never suspected he was feeding information to the very system they were fighting against. Then came the prescription narcotic investigation, and everything got complicated. The FBI wanted Elvis to help them identify doctors who were illegally supplying celebrities with pills, uppers, downers, pain medications, sleeping pills. The network spanned from Hollywood to Memphis to Las Vegas and back. Doctors were making fortunes writing illegal prescriptions for famous people who could afford to pay premium prices. These same pills were finding their way to the streets, destroying regular people's lives. The tragic irony was not lost on Jerry. Elvis was investigating the exact system that he himself was becoming dependent on. By the early 1970s, Elvis was taking pills to wake up, pills to perform, pills to sleep, and pills to deal with the stress of his impossible schedule. He knew exactly how easy it was to get prescriptions. He had relationships with multiple doctors who would write him anything he asked for. And now the FBI wanted him to identify which doctors were the worst offenders. Elvis gathered information that led to actual arrests. He identified doctors in 3 different states who were running prescription mills. He documented how much they were charging and who their celebrity clients were. His reports helped prosecutors build cases that resulted in medical licenses being revoked and some doctors going to prison. But the whole time, Elvis was watching his own reflection in this investigation. He was seeing his own future in the addiction stories he was reporting. He understood his own vulnerability in a way that terrified him. Betrayal, death threats, and dangerous truths. The worst moment came when Elvis discovered that someone close to him was involved in the illegal activities he was investigating. Jerry never told anyone the name, even after all these years. But Elvis had confided in him about the impossible choice he faced. The FBI wanted him to expose this person. They wanted evidence that would lead to an arrest. But this was not some random criminal. This was someone Elvis trusted. Someone who had been with him for years. Someone whose life would be destroyed if Elvis followed through. Elvis agonized over the decision for weeks. Jerry watched his friend lose sleep, lose weight, lose his sense of right and wrong. Elvis felt like he was being torn in half. His handlers kept pushing him to do his duty, to put country above personal loyalty, to remember why he had started this work in the first place. But Elvis could not shake the feeling that he was becoming the very thing he hated, a snitch, a betrayer, someone who destroyed people's lives to serve a system that might not even care about him. That assignment changed everything between Elvis and his FBI handlers. The trust started breaking down. Elvis began questioning whether the people running him actually cared about justice or just wanted results. He started wondering if he was just a tool they were using, a famous face they could exploit for intelligence gathering. The disillusionment set in slowly, but Jerry could see it happening. His friend was losing faith in the mission that had once excited him so much. Then the threats started coming. Dangerous criminals had begun to suspect that Elvis was more than just an entertainer. Too many people Elvis had been around were getting arrested. Too many operations were being busted right after Elvis had access to certain information. Word was spreading in the criminal underworld that maybe the king was not as innocent as he seemed. Maybe he was talking to people he should not be talking to. The first serious threat came in 1974. Someone sent a message through intermediaries that Elvis and his family were being watched. That if Elvis kept sticking his nose where it did not belong, there would be consequences. The threat specifically mentioned Lisa Marie, who was only 6 years old at the time. Elvis was terrified, not for himself, but for his daughter. The idea that his secret work could put her in danger made him physically sick. Security around Elvis increased dramatically. Fans thought it was just typical celebrity paranoia. People made jokes about Elvis's growing isolation and all the bodyguards surrounding him constantly. But Jerry knew the truth. Several of those new security personnel were actually FBI protection details. They were not there to keep fans away. They were there to watch for assassins and kidnappers. They were there because the threats were real and serious. Graceland became a fortress. The gates were reinforced. New security systems were installed. Guards patrolled the grounds 24 hours a day. Elvis stopped going out in public as much. He stopped doing the spontaneous things he used to love. Everything had to be planned and secured in advance. The stress of living under constant threat started destroying Elvis's health. He could not sleep without pills. He could not perform without pills. He could not function without pills. People close to Elvis noticed the paranoia but dismissed it as narcotic-induced delusions. They thought the pills were making him see dangers that were not really there. But Jerry knew better. The dangers were absolutely real. The threats were documented. The FBI had confirmed that organized crime figures had put Elvis on a list of problems that needed to be eliminated. The secret too dangerous to tell. By 1976, Elvis wanted out of his arrangement with the FBI. He had given them 7 years of his life. He had risked his safety and his family's safety. He had gathered intelligence that led to dozens of arrests. He had done everything they asked and more. But the FBI was not ready to let their most valuable asset walk away. Elvis was too useful. He had too much access. He knew too much about how their operations worked. Jerry remembers the night Elvis told him about his final assignment. It was early 1977, just months before Elvis died. They were sitting in the jungle room at Graceland, and Elvis looked more scared than Jerry had ever seen him. Elvis said he had stumbled onto something big, something that went way beyond narcotic dealers and mobsters. He had uncovered evidence of corruption at the highest levels of government. Elvis would not give Jerry all the details. He said it was safer if Jerry did not know everything. But he did say that he had discovered connections between organized crime and powerful political figures, names that would shock the American public if they ever came out, narcotic trafficking networks that reached all the way into Washington, money changing hands between criminals and elected officials, evidence that could bring down careers and possibly entire administrations. The burden of this knowledge was crushing Elvis. He told Jerry that he felt like he was in over his head, that he had never signed up to take on this kind of corruption, that he was just a singer from Memphis who wanted to help his country, not expose conspiracies that could get him unalived. Elvis had tried multiple times to extract himself from FBI work. He had meetings where he begged to be released from his obligations. He told his handlers that he was done, that he could not take the stress anymore, that his health was failing and he needed to step away. But the FBI refused to let him go. They told him he knew too much to just walk away. They reminded him of everything he had seen and heard over the years. They implied that if he tried to quit, there would be consequences. Not threats exactly, but strong suggestions that Elvis should keep cooperating. The agency that he had volunteered to help was now holding him hostage with his own service. The paranoia that people dismissed as narcotic-induced craziness was actually rational fear. Elvis was terrified that someone would silence him before he could figure out what to do with the information he had. He told Jerry multiple times that he knew too much to live peacefully, and powerful people wanted him quiet, that he did not know who to trust anymore, not even within the FBI itself. Elvis started giving Jerry coded warnings about what he knew. He told Jerry that if anything happened to him, certain documents were hidden in specific places. He made Jerry promise to look into things if his death seemed suspicious. He talked about his fear of being silenced like he already knew what was coming. The weight of these secrets was destroying Elvis faster than any pills could. The final days and suspicious death. The last real conversation Jerry had with Elvis was in early August 1977. Elvis seemed agitated and afraid. He kept looking over his shoulder even though they were alone at Graceland. He told Jerry again about the secrets he was carrying, about how trapped he felt, about how he saw no way out that did not end badly for him. Jerry tried to reassure him, tried to tell him everything would be okay. But Elvis just shook his head like Jerry did not understand how serious things really were. Then came August 16, 1977, the day Elvis died. Jerry was not at Graceland that day, but he heard details later that never made sense to him. There were people at the mansion who normally were not there. Elvis had received phone calls that morning that seemed to upset him greatly. People who were there said Elvis looked agitated and nervous, not sick. His final reading material included some government documents that disappeared before anyone could examine them closely. The death investigation was rushed in a way that bothered Jerry from the start. The medical examiner concluded heart attack almost immediately. But there were autopsy inconsistencies that raised questions. Elvis was only 42 years old. Yes, he had health problems and narcotic issues. But the speed with which everything was wrapped up felt wrong. Witnesses gave statements that later changed. Details that initially were reported suddenly were not mentioned anymore. What really disturbed Jerry was how quickly the FBI showed interest in Elvis's personal papers. Agents arrived at Graceland within hours of the death being announced. They wanted access to Elvis's private office. They were looking for specific documents. Things were removed from the mansion before the family could properly secure the property. Jerry tried to find out what they took, but nobody would give him straight answers. Medical experts who were not involved in the official investigation later questioned the heart attack conclusion. They pointed to evidence that did not fit that narrative. But by then, the case was closed. The official story was set. Any attempts to reopen questions were shut down quickly. Jerry had his own suspicions but no way to prove anything. He wondered if his best friend had been unalive to keep him quiet about what he knew. For years, Jerry lived with guilt about not protecting Elvis better. He replayed their last conversation over and over. He thought about warnings he should have heeded. He wondered if there was something he could have done to save his friend from whatever happened that August day. The declassified documents and cover-up. For decades, Jerry carried his suspicions in silence. He had no proof, just memories of conversations and observations that did not add up. People would have thought he was crazy if he talked about government conspiracies and Elvis being unalived, so he stayed quiet and lived with the burden of knowing something was terribly wrong but being unable to prove it. Then, in recent years, things started changing. The Freedom of Information Act forced government agencies to release old classified documents. Slowly, files from the 1970s began becoming public, and among those files were documents about Elvis Presley. Real FBI records confirming that Elvis had worked as an informant. Proof that everything Elvis had told Jerry was true. The documents showed the extent of Elvis's intelligence gathering over 7 years. There were reports Elvis had filed about organized crime activities in Las Vegas, records of information he provided about narcotic networks operating across multiple states, correspondence between FBI officials discussing their asset and how valuable he was to ongoing investigations, payment records showing money the government had paid Elvis for his services, though Elvis had never wanted payment. Jerry finally had vindication. After 40 years of wondering if he had imagined the whole thing or misunderstood what Elvis told him, here was proof in black and white. His friend had not been paranoid. The dangers had been real. The secret life had actually happened exactly as Elvis described it. But the documents also revealed how much was still being hidden. Entire sections were redacted with black bars covering sensitive information. The most important details about what Elvis knew in his final months were nowhere to be found in the released files. Someone had decided that certain information was still too dangerous to make public, even 50 years later. There were memos showing FBI concern about Elvis's mental state in his last year, records indicating that Elvis had tried multiple times to end his cooperation, documents discussing how to keep Elvis compliant and prevent him from going public with what he knew. The paper trail painted a picture of an agency that had become controlling and possibly threatening toward the man who had volunteered to help them. What chilled Jerry most were references to meetings and operations that had no details attached, just dates and codes with everything else redacted. Some of those dates matched times when Elvis had seemed particularly disturbed or frightened. Jerry believed those blacked-out sections contained the real story of what Elvis had discovered about high-level corruption, the secrets that had made him so dangerous that someone wanted him silenced. The documents proved Elvis's service to his country. They proved his patriotism and his sacrifice. But they also suggested a darker truth about his death. References to concerns about Elvis becoming unstable, discussions about what would happen if he talked, mentions of contingency plans. Everything pointed to an agency that saw Elvis as a problem they needed to manage, not a hero they needed to protect. Jerry's final confession and Elvis's true legacy. Jerry Schilling is speaking now at 81 because he finally can. The declassified documents gave him permission to break his silence without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. He has proof now, evidence that supports everything Elvis told him during those late-night conversations at Graceland. The burden of decades of silence has finally been lifted, and Jerry feels like he can breathe freely for the first time since 1977. Understanding Elvis's secret work completely reframes his entire life story. The prescription narcotic addiction that everyone used as evidence of weakness and self-destruction looks different now. Elvis was not just a spoiled celebrity who could not handle fame. He was a man trying to survive under impossible pressure, constant danger that he could never acknowledge publicly, threats against his family that he had to face alone, secrets that could get him unalived if he spoke about them. The pills were not recreation, they were attempted survival. The stress and paranoia that came from living a double life for 7 years would have destroyed anyone. Elvis had to lie to his closest friends every single day. He had to pretend everything was fine while watching for assassins. He had to smile for millions of fans while carrying knowledge that terrified him. He had to perform night after night while knowing that criminals wanted him dead and his own government would not let him walk away. Nobody could sustain that kind of psychological torture without breaking. Jerry believes Elvis's death was not an accident. Too many things about that day do not make sense. The rushed investigation, the convenient conclusions, the disappeared evidence, the FBI's immediate interest in Elvis's papers, the witnesses whose stories changed. All of it points to something more sinister than a simple heart attack. Jerry thinks Elvis knew too much about corruption involving powerful people who had the means and motive to silence him before he could expose what he had discovered. Elvis deserves recognition for his service to his country. He was a patriot who sacrificed everything: his privacy, his peace of mind, his health, his relationships, possibly even his life. He helped take down narcotic dealers and organized crime figures. He provided intelligence that led to dozens of arrests and prosecutions. He did dangerous work that no celebrity had ever done before or has done since. But instead of being remembered as a hero, he died being seen as a cautionary tale about fame and addiction. The complete truth changes Elvis's legacy forever. He was not just a self-destructive celebrity who could not handle success. He was a man destroyed by serving in the shadows, a whistleblower who was hunted for what he knew, an informant who paid the ultimate price for trying to do the right thing. His story is not about weakness. It is about a man who was crushed by forces more powerful than himself. Jerry wants the world to understand the price Elvis paid, living in constant fear while performing for millions, being unable to be authentic with anyone, watching his back every moment of every day, knowing that both criminals and possibly his own handlers wanted him controlled or eliminated, the loneliness of carrying secrets that could never be shared, the terror of realizing he was trapped with no way out. Elvis was braver than anyone knew. He faced dangers that remained invisible to the public. He carried burdens that would have broken most people much sooner. He tried to serve his country and got destroyed for it. Jerry believes his friend deserves to finally be seen for who he really was: a complicated man, a flawed hero, someone who tried to do good and paid for it with everything he had. The truth needed to come out so Elvis can finally rest in peace, so people can understand that his struggles were not just about pills and fame, so his death can be seen in the proper context of what he knew and who wanted him silent. Jerry hopes that speaking now, with evidence to support the story, will give his best friend the justice and recognition that has been denied for over 40 years. Elvis Presley was more than the king of rock and roll. He was a secret servant who died keeping secrets that powerful people did not want exposed. And now, finally, the world knows the truth. But if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.